The test of the morality of a society is what it does for its children. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. If you like that quote, well, here's another one from Kate Bingham, who is the former chair of the UK Vaccine Task Force. This quote is from October 2020. People keep talking all the time about it being time to vaccinate the whole population, but that is misguided. There's going to be no vaccination of people under 18. It's an adult-only vaccine for people over 50, focusing on health workers, care home workers, and the vulnerable. That's a quote from Kate Bingham, the former chair of the UK Vaccine Task Force back in October 2020. Well, last week, the UK has approved the COVID vaccines for babies aged 6 months to 4 years old. The medical watchdog states that the lower dose Pfizer jab is safe and effective for kids aged 6 months and above. Safe and effective. It's no surprise that Kate Bingham, with her statement that this is an adult-only vaccine, is no longer anywhere to be seen around the vaccine rollout after she stepped down just 1 month after the quote that I shared with you in November 2020. Now, I was reading some of my own journal notes from back in the early stages of the pandemic, as early as March. I keep a daily journal, which I record my reflections and notes and research around a lot of the things that I'm paying attention to. And as early as March 2020, I made a note in my journal that stated that this will turn into the catalyst for a widespread mass population global rollout of a vaccine. And that will end up being the driving story of this entire phase of time. Now, I couldn't have predicted that it would take 2.5 years to complete that task. But to me, very early on, it was inevitable. I was actually featured in a short documentary in October 2020, where I said the same thing. And lo and behold, here we are. And it has indeed become a vaccine for the entire population. And in fact, I shared some of my thoughts on Facebook towards the midpoint of 2020, I think it was, or maybe early 2021, where I shared that it's my belief that this will end up being rolled out to every living soul on the planet. And believe it or not, I was censored for making that post, but not only censored for making that post, I was fact-checked publicly, and I've delayed starting this broadcast, this live broadcast. If you're watching the replay, hello. But I was delayed starting this because I was trying to find the article from, I think it was 2020 or 2021, where I was fact-checked for stating that this would be rolled out to every living soul. Isn't it interesting to see what was fact-checked all those months and years ago, and how much of those things that have been fact-checked have now been vindicated and are now revealed publicly to be true? Well, in this episode, I'm going to comment on the latest announcement. As a new father of a 15-month-old son, I am petrified of the idea of this particular set of products being rolled out to children my son's age or younger or even older. And as I made those predictions about this product, this experimental new product being rolled out globally to almost every single living soul, it frightened me deeply that one day someone would come knocking on our door saying that your child needs to be vaccinated. Now, fortunately, the intensity of the times that we've lived through have to some degree passed, but it's left a bitter taste in the mouth, and it's also left a lasting residue of an authoritarian mission creep that is stemming into other areas of our life. And I don't think any of us can be as confident as we were that we have medical freedom in not only the United Kingdom, but around the world. And at that time, I was considering, I got to the depths as I was watching the medical mandates being rolled out and the way that the unvaccinated were being treated around the world. I had pondered to myself what I would do under the circumstances where my government and its representatives would force me or my family or my children, my child at this stage, to be vaccinated. I mentally played that story in my head, how I would react if someone came to my door. I'm sure I'm not the only one that thought that, and how I would defend my family if those circumstances ever arose. As I said, fortunately, it didn't reach that stage, but in some parts of the world, certainly not far off. Now, in this conversation, I'm broadcasting this live right now on the 12th of December, 2022. I'm broadcasting this live to Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and other platforms. And on these platforms, we're not actually allowed to have this conversation. I was censored for simply remarking on Facebook that this will be rolled out to every living soul. So in this conversation, I am going to be treading rather lightly because in the recent weeks, I have been censored on Facebook for covering the protests in China. I was banned from broadcasting and posting for a week, and all of my posts now are reduced in the algorithm. They're lower in the feed. They're basically trying to scupper my ability to reach you with my content. By this time, as a media producer, this is my lifeblood. It's what I rely upon to make a living, as well as to reach you with this type of information. So this has a huge impact on our ability to have these important conversations. And if you're watching this now on Facebook, please do hit the share button to help us break that algorithm. So I'm going to tread carefully in this episode, not to avoid speaking the truth, but just to protect our platform. And I will be doing a deep dive this Friday inside the Elevate community, where I will cover this conversation in full in an uncensored environment where I can not only freely speak the truth, but I can share the data. Because actually, believe it or not, it's the hard data, the hard facts, which lead to censorship. You would have thought it was the subjective, abstract nature of my feelings and thoughts and beliefs around the situation, which can be, any one of us can have a series of beliefs that are entirely subjective, but it seems that our world is flipped upside down. I discovered a show called the name of the show. The name of the show has completely escaped me. They called it the Upside Down. This world. I literally watched multiple series of the show. It's a very famous show. I can't remember it. My mind's gone blank. But we talked about in that they talked about the upside down, and I believe we're living in the upside down right now. We're living in the upside down on the basis that we used to live in a time where logic, reason, and fact were the driving force of debate. Well, now it's subjective, emotion, feelings, social constructs. They rule the day in this post-truth world that we live in. So on Friday, I'll be doing a deep dive on this full conversation without holding anything back inside the Elevate community. If you're not already part of our Elevate community, you can go to weareelevate.org and you will be able to join us on Friday live when I host this within my community. And we'll also be publishing the content in full inside the community. And we won't be publishing it on any of these platforms because we will get another strike and we may disappear forever. And we can't risk that right now. Believe it or not, if you're watching this for the first time, this is the conditions that we're operating in 2022. And despite Elon Musk taking the helm at Twitter, we still can't really talk about it. Dr. Peter McCullough, who's a leading cardiologist, who's Rich spoken about these issues for months during the last few years. It still hasn't had his account restored. So we are still difficult. We're in difficult water still. Now, let's get to the main part of the conversation. So the UK Medicines Regulator said that the jab meets safety, quality, and effectiveness standards. This means that now the government advisors can now choose whether the jab should be dished out to babies. And we'll speak more about that in a moment. Now, despite this approval, the Pfizer trial for this age group, like others, was a total shambles. And the reports that have been produced really do need to be looked at with a fine-tooth comb. Certainly, if you're a fellow parent, I would be taking real due caution. The difficulty is parents like you and I, we aren't trained in how to understand medical data and scientific reports. So we're kind of left out on our own limb to try and make an assessment. Now, fortunately for myself, I've spent the last 2 years literally covering all this information, and I've pretty much read well over 1,000 scientific reports now. I surrounded myself with hundreds of medical and scientific professionals who are my guide in this deeply complex world. It doesn't make me an expert by any stretch, but I've been able to at least understand what these reports are saying. And the word shambles is not treading lightly. It's a very fair assessment of not just this age group, but others. And it doesn't take much now although it does take a little bit of searching when you're searching online to look for any critical information of vaccines, because most of it has been cleansed. But we can still find the reports, and it is my belief that over time, over the passage of time, that justice will be served. At least accountability of the data will be revealed. The full transparency of the data will be revealed. Whether accountability will be served, that's a different question. But it's not surprising to learn that last week over 100 health professionals wrote to the MHRA to share their concerns. And guess what the response was from the MHRA? Well, at least they received one, but here is the verbatim quote of the response from the MHRA. Following the emergence of Omicron in November 2021, which is now over a year ago, population immunity increased markedly across many age groups. As you observed, the vast majority of children have had experience of SARS-CoV-2 infection, and the JCVI will be taking these factors into account in any advice provided in relation to children aged 6 months and 4 years. Time will be told on that. And despite sharing that, most concerning is that now that drug has been approved. Now, this approval in the UK follows the ever warp speed approval of anything that Pfizer asks the FDA in the United States to approve. On December the 5th of this year, yes, just several days ago, Pfizer asked the FDA to allow the bivalent shots for babies 6 months to 5 years of age to be approved. On the 5th of December, the request was made, and on the 8th of December, the application was approved. Now, not counting the day of submission and the day of approval, it therefore took the FDA just 2 days to consider this application. How many trials on infants and young kids with a bivalent vaccine? 0. So now a recently born child in the United States could have received 3 COVID-19 vaccines while in utero, another set of 3 COVID-19 vaccines upon reaching 6 months of age, and all 6 doses would be given within about 1 calendar year. Now, the Pfizer announcement is about as ridiculous as it can get. They state, again, their words, on top of a persistent stream of COVID-19 cases, surging seasonal respiratory illnesses in young children are straining health systems across the US. Interjection, why do you think that is? Resume quote, with many states reporting more than 90% of their pediatric hospital beds are occupied. Updated COVID-19 vaccines may improve protection against severe illnesses and hospitalization caused by SARS-CoV-2 in this age group. This is the quote from Pfizer. And note the words in particular. If I could put the words in bold as I'm speaking them on the screen, I would have done. The specific quote is that COVID-19 vaccines may improve protection against severe illness and hospitalization. Pfizer's not saying that they will improve the protection of infants, since nobody has any idea. They are just saying that since kids seem very sick this year, let's give them this shot anyway, because it may protect them. Now, not only did these products get approved, but both Moderna and Pfizer's updated COVID vaccine will now be administered to children whose parents are willing to let them as part of their routine inoculation schedule. Now, what this does is removes the distinction between the novel technology in these new vaccines, rushed to the market under the pretext of an emergency, and how routine traditional vaccines are offered. Now, surely maintaining this critical distinction is vital given the stream of unanswered questions about the long-term safety of these new products. Surely. Now, meanwhile, in the UK, Pfizer's COVID product was quietly given full marketing authorization, no longer temporary, for 5 to 11-year-olds and 12 years up to adults. And this was not even announced by the mainstream media, but instead ferreted out of the persistence of Sir Christopher Chope via a parliamentary question. And the response to how the conditions have been met was, quite frankly, chilling. Basically, we've already given so many doses that we now know it's safe and effective. And believe it or not, there are already government advertising campaigns, again, your tax pounds in this economic environment, targeting young people. And of course, as per the NHS, the coronavirus vaccines are safe and effective. They give you the best protection against COVID-19, end quote. interesting to see how, despite the vast safety signals in the data, and even anecdotally, I think, every time I speak to people about their experience and their close friends and family and colleagues, and you ask about what stories have you seen and heard, and that everyone has a story. Despite this, the governments continue with a safe and effective mantra. The European Medicines Agency states that the authorized COVID-19 vaccines are, guess what? Safe and effective. It's clever, that repetition, isn't it? It's repetition. The thing about repetition and what's known about the human belief system and how we form our beliefs about anything and our subsequent identity around those beliefs, if we are to act in accordance with those beliefs, is that repetition and intensity creates a belief system within our human mind. So isn't it interesting that this technique has been used all over the world on repeat, safe and effective, to the point where it basically becomes an echo in people's minds? Not surprising. It's a deliberate psychological tactic in order to make you believe that they are what? Don't need to say it again. Now, the US Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, said on its websites and elsewhere that COVID genetic injection was safe. And guess what? Effective. And in promoting the CDC's recommendation for young children, the White House response coordinator stated that the vaccination for children aged 6 months to 5 years was exceedingly safe and effective and thoroughly tested. Now, how many of you believe that statement is likely to be true? Thoroughly tested, ? Exceedingly safe and effective, ? What do you think? Tell me in the comments. Now, what's interesting, in the latest release from the FDA, Commissioner Robert Califf stated this, and I quote, "More children now have the opportunity to update their protection against COVID-19 with a bivalent COVID-19 vaccine, and we encourage parents and caregivers of those eligible to consider doing so. The more people who keep up to date with COVID-19 vaccinations, the more benefit there will be for individuals, families, and public health by helping to prevent severe illnesses, hospitalizations, and deaths," he added. But is there actually any clinical evidence to support these scientific assertions? Scientific, small s, scientific? And how is it that the benefit increases for individuals, families, and public health if more people do that? We know that it doesn't stop infections or transmission. That's clearly documented now. And I don't think even the fact checkers can even dispute that now, but we'll try. I've said it out loud. Let's see what happens. But what's interesting even more is that the very same FDA press statement says that the data, this is to quote, "the data to support giving an updated bivalent booster for these children is expected in January." Yes, that's right. This is the latest quote from this month where they said the data to support this decision is expected, that's right, next month in 2023. How can the commissioner of the world's premier drug regulating agency assert that the mass administration of an experimental medical product in the lowest risk population will, quote unquote, prevent severe illnesses, hospitalizations, and deaths a month before the data is even published, let alone all the data that's gone before it in other age groups? Well, what's interesting is, if you hadn't already realized, that the FDA receives at least 75% of its drug review funding from, guess what industry? Take a guess. That's right, the biopharmaceutical industry. And what about our own shore here in the UK, the MHRA, who is now approving the vaccines for babies here? Well, the cost of the UK MHRA vaccines, the MHRA medicines regulation is also funded by fees from, guess which industry? That's right, the pharmaceutical industry, a relationship that is surely too close for comfort. So here we have regulation being completed and approved on demand within a very short period of time funded by the very industry that they are serving. Doesn't that raise question marks in your mind at the very least, even if you're looking at this for the first time with a skeptical mind? But what does the data actually say about the safety and effectiveness of the COVID shots for children? That is the important question. And as I stated at the beginning of this episode, I can't tell you. I can't tell you in this episode. I can't tell you on these mainstream platforms, because doing so will likely result in not only this video being deleted, but even my entire platform, where over the last 2 years, we've reached between 10 and 15 million views. 10 and 15 million views Our first platform, the Pandemic Podcast, was taken down by YouTube once we hit 5 million views for talking about a unnamed drug that is not a vaccine that could potentially have saved lives. You can take a guess by now if you haven't already guessed what drug that is. I can't say it now for fear of being censored once more. But we must talk about the data. And there is an abundance of data available, but there's also a lot that isn't available. And there's also processes that aren't up to scratch for such a global rollout, and particularly when children's lives are at stake. And I can't help but have fear about the future for young children who are being exposed to not just this new experimental medication, but the precedent that's been set over this last couple of years for the expedience of the rollout of untested drugs and the implications that they'll have on future generations, let alone their parents and grandparents and above. So if you would like to explore this in more depth in a censorship-free environment, then in the description of this episode, I sent you a link to our episode that we'll be recording privately inside the Elevate community. And if you followed the Pandemic Podcast, you know that we are ruthless in fact-checking ourselves. We only use repeatable data sources. We only turn to experts that we know we can trust. So on Friday, I'm only going to present what I've located myself through my own research and my team's research, and also from the experts that we've turned to for guidance. If you'd like to join us live, we won't be streaming it to any of our platforms. We won't be posting it to YouTube. We're only going to host it exclusively inside of our Elevate community, where we know we won't be censored. We can speak freely. The link's inside the description, but if you simply go to weareelevate.org, it won't take you very long to find the event listing inside our platform. You'll be able to join us live at 5 on Friday. We'll be broadcasting internally. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions, and we'll be saving the episode for future release inside the community. And it's my hope that one day, in fact, we've also got, if you haven't already looked inside our community, we've got an entire library of censored material. We've uploaded we're starting to upload. We've uploaded 10 to 15 of the episodes that were censored or were lost due to the deplatforming of our platform. You'll be able to access all of our censored material inside the Elevate community. And it's somewhat of it's sad to say, but it's become somewhat of a time capsule of the last couple of years of the Pandemic Podcast, where we've explored all these issues in full. So if you're interested to go and look back at what the tech platforms, big tech, big pharma, big media didn't want you to hear, well, just go and log into our censored content library, and you'll see all the stories that the mainstream did not want you to hear. So come and join us inside the Elevate community at weareelevate.org. We'll be having the conversation in full with full research and the data on Friday. It's my hope you'll come and join us in a censorship-free environment and support our independent media by joining us. My name is Astin-Gregory. This is the Pandemic Podcast as part of Elevate Media. Tell me what you think about the latest approval. If anyone was in doubt about my views on this particular situation, you just need to take a look at my enthusiastic Twitter post that I shared last week, where I do like to speak politely in these types of environments. You never know who's watching. And if your children are reading, then I apologize for what you see on the screen. But I made my views very, very clear on my tweet last week when I first got wind of this situation. So thank you so much for tuning in. It's a pleasure serving as always. Hopefully see you inside of our Elevate community at weareelevate.org. And hopefully you'll join us on our live episode on Friday afternoon.